What's up, guys? It's Dan. I'm gonna run through real quick, kind of like a Cliff Notes guide of fastest way to explain to a beginning player in World of Tanks what each country is good at, what they're not so good at, and like the best country to start with, in my opinion, if you're new to the game. So this is really if you're new to the game. If you're not, by now you know. But if you guys have some opinions and some comments you want to put below, these are really centered for new players. So give some advice for some newer players in the comments. I'd greatly appreciate that. That's what my channel is all about, is trying to help people that are newer to a game appreciate it a little bit more. So we'll start with my favorite, the Americans, obviously. The American tanks are, as we talked about in the other video, they're really like the Mario class. They're not great at any one thing, and they don't suck at any one thing. Particularly, they tend to have really strong turret armor, so you play this class, quote-unquote, hold down. Meaning, really, if you're going to expose anything, you're only exposing your turret here and not your hull down here. So, in my opinion, this is probably not the best to play when you first start off. So when you first start off, you're probably running, trying to get to the action, and really not knowing what's going on. You just want to kill stuff. So this, in my opinion, is not the best class to play when you first start off. Really, I would say they're above average in a few categories. Their biggest weak spot is their hull. Their fronts tend to be fairly well sloped, but their hull and their rear make them really susceptible to a lot of damage from tank destroyers and a lot of classes that can hit from farther away. Not just the heavies, but with their mediums and lights, the same thing. So above average guns, I'd say pretty good gun depression, meaning your gun's able to move down on the maps that have hills, giving them an advantage on those types of maps. That's pretty much it for the Americans. I'd say it's not the best to play in the beginning, but it's also not the worst. It's really middle of the road. Looking at probably the next one, let's just go to the French. So if you look at the French tanks, French tanks are like, I mean, they're not going to have a lot of armor. They're not. This isn't really something you want to play for a newer player, for sure. You don't want to play the French. Once you've gotten to like tier 7 or tier 8 on one line, I'd say you probably can go to the French. They're going to have pretty good reload speeds, generally speaking, and they're really fast. So their burst damage and like damage per minute tends to be really high. A lot of times you'll run into some of these AMXs at higher tiers, and you're like, oh shit, I was just completely alive, and now I'm dead. And it's that quick, especially if they hit you in a weak spot. So they can be fun to play, but not right in the beginning. They're definitely not fun to play. They're really frustrating because they don't really have a lot of armor for especially most of the lower tiers. Now, one more thing to mention is that at tier 10, a lot of the generalities, especially tier 9 and 8, even 2, a lot of the generalities of the classes can go to shit. So most of what I'm saying is going to apply to tier 1 through 7. And even then, there's always exceptions to the rule. But just to give you like some general advice on if you're just starting, some of the countries you probably want to play. Moving on to next, we'll go to the Chinese. So Chinese, again, kind of a middle of the road. They don't really have a ton of weaknesses outside of maps on hills. You're going to hate playing them because they have very bad gun depression. Some of their tanks are really good. T-34 I think is pretty solid in that tier. The IS-2 I think is pretty good here as far as a heavy in tier 7. I think that's a stronger one in my opinion. Not really greatly armored, but they have pretty good guns on them. Really that's pretty much it with the Chinese. Again, they don't have a lot of options here, so this isn't one I'd recommend to start with. Since we're here, we'll go to the Japanese. Same thing, your choices are kind of limited as far as what you're starting with. I will tell you, this tank is fun as shit to play. The tier 501 experimental, it has a huge gun on it. So if you can get to your tier 5 tank, that's something that would be, really, really awesome to get to and play, because I think that's one of the most fun tanks that they have. But again, they're not really well armored. You can see a tier 5, only 70 hull armor, 75 turret armor. And then if you were to look at the tier 5 heavy, he's going to outperform that. But the gun, not as good as what you'd find in the Japanese tank. So They have a pretty good reload speed, but overall they're not as accurate as what you'd find in the Germans or even the Americans for the most part. So, in my opinion, stay away from the Japanese until you've gotten a little more experienced. From there, the Czechs. This is a newer line. Again, not one I'm going to recommend for newer players. Just not a lot of options here. Not a ton of options. I've been able to get to the tier 4 tank, and I'd say it's okay, but it's not overwhelming, and it's still just a medium, so not a lot of options. Don't start here if you're a newer player. Going to the British. The British, this actually has quite a few options in the British line, but they're like, if you look at their gun, again, we'll go to like tier 5. Let's go to tier 5. Let's see which one to pick out. We'll go to the Churchill. This is a pretty fun tank to play. It's got a lot of hull armor. The turret armor is okay. You go to their higher end gun, 75 millimeter, not bad, but overall not as high damage as what some of the other ones would be in this line. And they're not. They're kind of slow. The tanks are kind of heavy. They're kind of slow. I don't want to say they're the heaviest. They're not as heavy as the Germans, but they're not as agile. So they have to rely on their heavier armor. But they are fast reloading, so they can be fun to play. But again, not one that I'd really recommend for a newer player, for sure. The two that I would recommend if you're just going to start are by far the Germans and the Russians. And here's the recommendation I'd give you. If you're a little more patient and you like to play sniper classes in games, the German line's probably for you. If you're not, and you're more about being a tank, like in a lot of games, literally being like the meat shield in like World of Warcraft or EverQuest or those types of games, where you always want to be the first to the action, and that's the route you want to go, definitely go with the Soviet tanks. They're a lot heavier armor. They play really well up front with their heavy and medium lines. Specifically, the heavy line's really fun. If you really like to just run out there, and that's what you're going to do when you're new. You don't know what the fuck you're doing. So you're going to run out. You want to be in the middle of all the action. So you're going to get to tier 5 and probably play pretty well with the KV-1s. It's a really strong tank. And in tier 6 too, the KV-85, that's a really strong tank. So in my opinion, the Russians are the best way to start when you're just starting World of Tanks. They give a lot of advantage to players who, I don't want to say don't know what they're doing, but you probably don't know what the fuck you're doing at first when you're playing this game. There's a lot to it. And it's not just run in and shoot, but that's really what the Russians are. So until you get your feet wet and you start to get comfortable with some of the maps, this is a great country to start with. Now, if you look at the Germans, the reason I say be patient is the German guns are much more accurate. They will really allow you to, a few of them allow you to really snipe and have some fun with that. The medium and tank destroyer line especially. But their heavies are also pretty good for newer players. You don't have to play as hull down as you would with the Americans. They have a little bit better hull armor than the Americans do. Their turret armor isn't as good, but they're pretty solid options as far as for newer players. So again, guys, just to kind of recap, the first 3 countries I'd recommend would be the Germans. Actually, number 1 would be the Russians. Start with the Russians if you're newer. If you're a little more patient, you could play the Germans. And if you're even more patient than that, you can play the Americans. If you're going down the heavy lines, the American, in my opinion, is probably the most difficult to get to, because this M3 Lee is a really, really hard tank to play. It doesn't have an individual turret, so if we were to look at it, if we look at this, you can see there's no turret. It's really all in one, so you have to move the tank in order to get a shot, making the gun depression really shitty, and also making it just in general really hard to move around and get flank shots or get shots in good areas without exposing yourself completely. So in my opinion, start with the Russians, then go to the Germans, then try the Americans, and I think those are the first 3 that will get your feet wet as far as hopefully allowing you to get a pretty good win rate and a lot less deaths when you first start playing. So hopefully that helped. If you guys have any more advice for newer people, please throw it in the comments below. Thanks for watching, guys. See ya.